Okay, you're officially on a recorded line. There we go. Cool. So welcome to the August 1st monthly meeting of Atlanta Microsoft BI Power BI Group digital event, of course, for the past 2 years, but we're going to record it. And I'm going to talk a little bit in a moment where we can find the recordings. So what we're going to do first, I'm going to go through a few housekeeping items as I do usually, always, almost, and some news and announcements. I'm going to cover a few new things in Power BI since the last time we met, which was in July. But do we have anybody new to the group except the presenters? Anybody who hasn't attended our meetings at all? Any newcomers? Don't have that many people yet. I guess not. Well, main site, Meetup. We used to have other sites. We also on the community powerbi.com, but the main website is Meetup. Please invite your friends, coworkers to subscribe if you think that they're going to get some value. What else? Okay, speaking of value, if you get some, if you find these meetings useful, spread the word. Recordings, we post them on YouTube. Here is the shortcut link. I'm going to put it also in the chat window. https://bit.ly Atlanta BIRX is the link. And this way, you're going to find all the recordings since we became virtual for the past couple of years. And this is where this recording is going to go in about an hour, maybe even less since we are done today. Our meetings are once per month, typically on the first Monday of the month, unless it falls on a holiday. And I still haven't heard from Microsoft about going back to the in-person meetings. I don't think they still allow groups. When that happens, we will reassess the situation, see where we are. If you want to get a little bit more involved in helping us, always looking for speakers. So if you know somebody who is willing to present, let me know. Share feedback. That's especially if you are interested in actually helping implement that feedback, because we're always looking for helpers as well. So if something think we can improve it, I'm all ears, especially if you are going to take the initiatives. On the subject of jobs, we've got, this is where I typically give the opportunity for anyone who is looking for BI talent in the Microsoft BI area. Please let us know, unmute yourself, and let us know about the opening. Or if you are shy and you don't want to talk about it, put it in the chat window. Let us know. Is somebody looking for BI, Microsoft BI guys? Any Microsoft BI openings? Guess not. So we're going to keep on going. The next thing that I wanted to cover was actually, I wonder, looks like I have a hidden slide that I forgot to unhide, but hide slide, there we go. So about the events, something that caught my attention, we have Microsoft Power Platform Conference. Power Platform is the umbrella name that Microsoft uses not only for 4 products actually: Power BI, Power Apps, Power Automate, Virtual Agents, and I think Dynamics actually goes in there as well as a 5th product. So if you want to learn about these products, so Microsoft has an event, September 20th, 22. This is going to be a paid event. And this is the link. Go and check it out. Will be interesting. Next thing on the agenda, some news, some actually new developments in Power BI since the last time we met. Hi, Mark. So the three things actually caught my attention. There wasn't a lot happening, I guess, because of the holiday, vacationing, and all that. But the first thing is that we now can add metrics. So what is a metric? Previously was called goals in Power BI. And I'm going to actually talk a little bit about that. I'm going to show you what that feature is. But the idea here is that, all right, we are a company, we've got Power BI, and people want to actually track goals in the organization. Like, if you want to use another fancy name, will be key performance indicators. But we don't have IT on our disposal, so business users will have to actually take things in their own hands. And how do they do that? Well, in Power BI, we have a premium feature called Power BI Metrics. And I demonstrated that before. I'm going to show you a little bit of how that works in a moment. But essentially, you set up goals like what our revenue should be, what it is, how it tracks against the goal. And then we track it. We track it to see how we're doing, right, against the goal. So we can do this in Power BI online, but then on Power BI desktop, we can, once we have that scorecard with bunch of goals, we can actually add it as a visual. And what's new in this feature is that now we can add individual goals. You don't have to add the entire scorecard. Maybe we have 20 goals on the scorecard. We just want to add one of them inside the report that we create. And now we can do that. Azure Maps. So in Power BI, we have not one, not two, not three, not four, but I think five map visualizations. The latest one is Azure Maps, which uses the Azure Maps API behind the scenes. So that one actually is being evolved. Hopefully one day what I'm going to see, instead of 4 or 5 maps, is going to be just one that does it all for me, allows me to do custom shapes and fill maps and heat maps and all that stuff. So it looks like that very well might be Azure Maps, because there are some interesting features. And the latest one being that now we can do fill maps that actually we could do in Power BI since the very beginning, almost. But now we can do it also with Azure Maps. On top of that, Azure Maps has a lot of other features, ability to do layers, traffic, all that stuff. So if you want to do mapping, interesting in mapping, definitely check it out. And finally, we have execute queries REST API, a new API. And the goal there is that what it means for you is that, let's say you build Power BI, but now you want to get the data. Maybe you have some external partners that are not, they don't want to give them access to reports. You just want to give them the ability to actually execute DAX queries and get the results back, right? So this API allows us to do just that, allow us to send DAX queries, just like you can send it to analysis services, basically, and get the results back. This is the good thing. The bad thing is that, just like anything else, there are limitations. So, for example, Microsoft limit the amount of data you're going to get back, and have these weird rules. So the number of cells have to be like 1 million. So, for example, if you get 50 columns, then you divide 1 million by 50, and what is it, like 200,000 or something? I don't know. That's your limit. If you want to get more columns, then you should get, you get less rows, because we're going to cap this. We have this nice design pattern where we're going to cap the results, and there is no way to get the rest, right? There is no paging or anything else. So I'm not really happy about this. Let's see how the community will react on this. Speaking of which, my favorite way of approaching new projects and give the client a little bit more flexibility is to do a data mart instead of doing Power BI against the data set. If the data is a data mart, good things can happen. If one day we decide to switch to another tool, let's say Power BI is not so cool anymore, we have the data, we have the data quality, we have the data in our disposal in the Azure SQL database. At least that part we can salvage, right? Which is probably a lot. And the other thing is that, with that data, you can do whatever you want. You can integrate it any way you want. You can let your partners consume it. And interestingly, I wrote a blog recently on this subject. If you want to, little self-promotion here. If you want to learn about, shall we go in the Power BI, pure Power BI direction where we have a data source, and now we're going to slap this Power BI data set on top of that, and everything is simple, right? Or should we go and implement the data mart? So might find that blog that I wrote interesting about that, about this feature that I just talked about, execute queries. What else? What else is happening in here? Well, just to recap what we're going to talk about today. So this meeting is going to be, this meeting actually we're going to have two presentations for the price of one. We're going to talk about automating Power BI in a different ways. And Christina and Tim, I'm sorry, I didn't know that you're going to tell us about it, the career change. I thought that you were both of you from the same company, but sorry about that. Didn't have time to change it. Next meeting, first Monday of September, September 5th. What are we going to talk about? Incremental refresh and hybrid tables in Power BI. All right. And Shapnan Watson is going to do it. And the last thing that I wanted to show you before I forget, I want to show you that real cool feature, right? About the how we can import a goal. So here I am as a business user, and here in the visualizations pane in Power BI Desktop, I have a visual called metrics. Again, used to be called goals. Now it's called metrics. Same thing. Currently in preview. Make sure you enable it because this is a preview feature. So you should go here to options and go to preview features and make sure you check everything in here. That's what I do, so I don't miss the great thing, the latest and greatest. And here it is, metrics visual right here at the bottom is what I'm going to show you right now. All right, so somebody has already set up a scorecard using this Power BI goals feature. Let's say I want to consume only one metric from that scorecard. So I'm going to go and add that visual. I'm going to go and click add metrics in here. And now it gives me a choice basically. Do you want to get the entire scorecard, which was the original, the initial, how this visual was designed initially, or do you want to get specific metric in the visual? So that's the new feature. So I'm going to actually select add a metric. Now here, actually, you can create things from scratch if you want. You can do it in Power BI online, or you can do it inside Power BI Desktop. But in my scenario, I say, I would imagine somebody has already actually published that scorecard in there. So what I want to do is just use something from it. So I'm going to take this path for browse metric. And then that's going to bring me to my talent where I have all the scorecards here set up. And one of them is the sales scorecard. And the sales scorecard has 4 goals. So this is what, if you haven't seen, how you can build scorecards with Power BI metrics, that's what they look like. I'm not going to go in details here, but we have static and what we call dynamic metric. A static metric, an example of static metric will be, for example, this growth in customer base. So I don't have a data behind it. I don't have a system to track it. Maybe what I can do, I just want to go and actually create that goal and say, and manually update it by saying that maybe I want to onboard 100 customers. This is my goal. My actual is 80. So periodically I can go there and manually change these numbers. That will be a static, not data-driven goal. And where the things become more interesting is actually I can add dynamic goals. And the way it works, because Microsoft targets business users, so they don't want to require them to do any modeling. They say, okay, if you have reports that actually gives you this this data, for example, actual against the budget, you can actually quickly assemble. You can connect to that report, and you can get this measures. It can filter them if you want. And then every time the report data changes, that metric is going to get updated. So this revenue metric here that I created was actually data driven. It came from existing reports. So what I can do in here, I can go and actually select this revenue metric and I can click add it to a report. So now what we have is this metric actually is added to the report. It can become part of my dashboard in here. And obviously every time it changes, the data changes, that the metric is going to get updated over time to show me how I'm doing against the revenue. So this is the new feature that we added, the ability to add specific metric, not the entire scorecard, to your report. And I think that's all from me. Does anybody have any questions before we proceed to the main presentation?
Hey, Tio, it's Mark Redfern. Just wanted to give you a heads up. You said the next month's meeting is going to be on September 5th. I don't know if you are aware that's Labor Day.
Ooh, really?
Yes, sir.
Well, that's.
Sorry to burst your bubble, but I thought you might
Well,
want to.
thank you for reminding me. I didn't know that. I missed it. Well, we're gonna change it to September 12th, but thank you so much for letting me know.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
No problem. All right. Anything else? Any questions for this, what we covered, or Power BI or Microsoft BI in general? Anything that kept you awake last night, tossing and turning? Power BI is too much for me. Any problem? Or maybe we can leave that. If you have a problem, probably should leave it at the end of the presentation. Any questions? Nothing. Silence. All right then. Well, Christina, Tim, I'm gonna invite you to take the floor virtually, metaphorically. So go ahead and tell us about how to automate Power BI.
Sounds good. Thanks, Teo. So I'll start us off. Like was said earlier, I'm Christina. I'm a data and analytics consultant over at 3Cloud. I'll share my screen real quick. Here we go. So you might know me from Data on Wheels. I do co-write on that blog with my dad, Steve Hughes. We both are really passionate about data, and we've really enjoyed being able to co-write on a blog together and grow and expand our knowledge in vastly different ways. So feel free to check us out. Again, just dataonwheels.wordpress.com. There are quite a wide range of topics in here. So to easily find what we're going to talk about today, and if you want to go even further with what I'm going to talk about today, I made a category. So in the blog, you scroll down, there's a category filter here for you. There's one for C#, Tom, and Power BI, and that's what we'll be going over today. There are also links in here to GitHub, and there's also just raw code in here as well. So if you're looking for that after this presentation, feel free to check that out. And I can leave a link in the chat once we're done as well. So to kind of kick us off, the main topic here is going to be automating Power BI within an application. So Tim and I are going to approach that very differently. So in my use case, for example, you have a customer or a client or even your own company has decided they want to embed Power BI within their application. And maybe they want to make changes to a data model after it's been already published to the service. If you are like me and you have seen this happen, especially in Excel spreadsheets, what often will happen is if someone changes a column name or they remove a column or they add a column, Power BI will fail at the refresh if you edit or delete a column, and it will fail to pick up the new column in your table. So it's a protection measure. It's the way analysis services cubes worked, where essentially it locks in a schema in the Power BI service, and that schema can't get touched after the fact except by the XMLA endpoint. So that's what we're going to work with today. You will need It is a premium only feature, so you'll need a premium workspace in order to replicate this lab. But essentially, if you are embedding things into your application, you likely already have a premium SKU. So something to consider. This is not very typical small business. This is an enterprise level type of situation here. So like I said, we're going to start out with a pretty simple worksheet just so you guys can kind of follow along with me and make sure I don't have anything sneaking up my sleeve. If we look at the edit button in here, we can look at our list of fields and we'll see that it's a pretty simple table. We've got one hierarchy in here, but otherwise just a few columns, and we've got a few measures. So I'll keep this this in mind as we go along, and we will see this slowly change as we apply our C# to it. So I'm going to go back to the reading view and pull up said C#. So this is pretty complicated. It took me a little while to build and wrestle through. So I'll point out a couple things as we go along and walk you guys through the code, but I'm not going to live code because unfortunately I am not a C# developer. If we run into issues, I have needed to live code in every single one of these demos, but I am really hoping to avoid it this time. But if so, thank you in advance for your patience. So as we go through this, I will call out my first blog in this series literally walks you through how to make a simple C# application. So if you're new to it like me, it will walk you through every single step I took, and you can fully recreate this as a proof of concept for whoever you need to present it to. So, alrighty. So with this one, it's a pretty simple C# code as far as C# goes. I'm just building myself an internal class here. The reason for that is that I realized I had built this a few times on my computer, and if you have it just as a class, it will say that this class already exists and won't let you create it again. So internal class keeps it in here. I think of it like a temp table in SQL, but I have been told that that is incorrect. So something similar to that, where you're not trying to create something that already exists, if that makes sense. Alrighty, so the first part of this is going to be how we connect to our actual Power BI dashboard. So in this case, 3Cloud has provided me with a premium workspace, so that's what I'm going to use. So I'll show you guys where you can grab this information. I've got a workspace connection here. You'll notice it's the API .b1 org, and then that's my workspace name. So pretty nifty. I'll show you guys where to find that in the service here. So you'll notice I've got my little diamond for premium, and then under settings, and then under premium again, you'll see workspace connection. So you can just copy this from here or just hit the copy button, and that's how it will get copied into here exactly as it needs for this code. So once I've got my workspace, essentially what it'll do is it'll convert that workspace into a server. So if you think about Power BI converting it into database names, essentially what it is a workspace gets converted to a server, a data set gets converted to a database. It's a little confusing when you're actually working with SQL alongside Power BI, but that's the way that the C# is working. So just wanted to call that out before it gets too confusing down the road. So if we've got our SQL server, and I'm going to say it now, our Power BI workspace or our server, we're going to connect to it. After that, what I want it to do is I'm going to have it go through every single data set / database, and I'm just going to use the C# words from now on. So hopefully you can follow along with me a little bit easier, but we're going to enumerate through every single database inside of our server here. And I want it to tell me what the ID is for each one. I want the name, compatibility level, and the last updated date. So there are a lot of components within each of these classes that you can find. I found all the documentation under analysis services because Power BI is just analysis services with a new front UI and a few more capabilities. So if you're curious, again, all the links are in my blog post and I can always send them to you later. But it is a wealth of knowledge and it is not where you think it is. So feel free to check that out. So once we've got that, the next thing I want it to do is I have a specific database I want to look at. So you might have noticed that inside of here, I've got my Tom and XMLA POC. So this is already connected to a gateway, which you will need to run different portions of the script. And we'll get to that and I'll show you. But essentially, I've got this one hooked up and ready to go. So this is the one I'm going to use. You'll notice it grabs the actual GUID from there. You can grab the GUID from the URL as well. It is easier to find from the data set. So if I were to go in here, you'll see that this is the GUID right there. So makes it a tad easier just to see at a glance. All right. So back in here, the next thing I want it to do is I want it to take this database, and then I want it to tell me every single table inside of my database. So pretty nifty. Each of these each loops will just kind of enumerate through each of them, which is pretty nice. The other thing is I noticed that if you don't specify a database, it will only grab models from the first database in the list. So in my example, if I had not specified which one I wanted to go through, it would just grab 3Cloud Power BI Trickery. It would not grab my Tom XMLA because that would not be the first one in the list. So something to keep in mind, especially as you're coding in C#, you're going to want to be very particular about having something to cache your GUIDs in, and you can pop those in as different variables. So from there, I want to grab a single table called product, which you might have remembered is the only table other than measures. And then I want to grab each of my columns. I'm going to grab the column name, and then I want to grab all my measures from my measure table. And I've got a couple other pieces in here that we won't go into in this demo, but again, there are blog posts that go into more detail on how to manipulate translations and hierarchies. Pretty cool stuff, so definitely check it out, but it definitely turns into an 1.5 to 2 hour presentation really fast. So I'm going to leave that out for now, but if you want to, it is in the code. So feel free to check that out. And we'll see it in our script when we run it. So cool. So I've got a few things I want it to list out. I've got some commented out code that we'll go through next, but I just kind of want to see it run. I want to see some lines come back. At the end, I've got more lists out because essentially I want it to return more stuff to me to make sure that things actually changed when we go to change it. I will call out to you guys right here. There are a few things happening at the end of this code. So I've got one that refreshes the table that I'm updating. And I've got two that are doing things to the actual model itself. So the first one is a request refresh. And this is why you need to have your data model connected to a gateway already, or essentially the credentials managed. So if it's an online source that doesn't need credentials, then this won't be an issue at all. But you'll need to refresh it in order to update anything in the data model. And then you'll need to save those changes. Save changes took me forever to find in the documentation. It needs to be a line after your request refresh. If it is anywhere else in the code, it will not work. So just something to keep in mind. You can move around a bunch of these pieces and it'll be fine. This is not one of those pieces. All right, I'm going to go ahead and run that and we'll see what happens here. Pop this up. So you'll notice it's going to make me authenticate, which is great because in the code, I didn't pass any authentication. That is something that you'll want to do in production. So unfortunately for 3Cloud, I don't have access to create my own service principal account, but that is what you would want to do instead of having your own personalized credentials, either hand coded or have that pop up like it just did there. Now, pretty sweet. You're going to see here we've got all of our IDs for all of our databases, and we've got the name, the last updated, compatibility level. This is awesome. This is great. I can see at a glance everything is in there. Something that's cool is we can see all of our tables in here, and I went ahead and pulled out a property called is hidden, which you might think is kind of silly. I had no hidden tables in my model. But it turns out I did have a hidden table. So there's this date table template field that ends up getting hidden behind the scenes. And the reason for that is Power BI does a lot of date time functionality for you in the back end. So if you have a lot of dates that are formatted as dates in your data model, keep in mind Power BI is making little hidden tables in the background to run things more efficiently that might be clogging up your refreshes. So this is kind of a cool way to expose that and to see it at a glance and recognize, oh, hey, maybe we should use some keys instead of actual dates because we don't need the actual dates for too much. All right, so then we've got my columns. You'll notice it does a row number for me. That row number column, again, is hidden, and it's used as an index, essentially, within Power BI to make things run faster. One of the many reasons that star schemas are very important. I won't go into it right now, but if you don't know the term star schema and you're working actively in Power BI data models, go check it out for sure. Something else that's cool, I've got one culture is what they call their translations. It looks like I'm using English United States. That makes sense. In the United States, and I'm currently in an English laptop, primary language laptop. Got hierarchies. You'll notice I only have one hierarchy, which matches what I've got in my model. And that hierarchy has 2 levels. Something of note is that the leveling starts at 0. So if you wanted to move or manipulate any of the hierarchies, keep in mind that level 0 is level 1. Level 1 is actually level 2. So when you're moving stuff around, don't accidentally put your level 2 in level 1, or your level 1 in level 2, I guess. So kind of fun. And then I had it list out all my columns again, and you'll see why I did that in a minute. So pretty neat. We connected to it. We got some data back. Any questions on this first part?
I don't think we have any questions, Christina, yet, but probably they will come later. So keep on going, please.
Awesome. No worries. Just triple checking. So then I'm going to go to our first new section of code. I add these little hints in here to make sure I stop at good points. But one of the cool things we can do with this is deleting a column and allowing our model to refresh the schema. So that's essentially what we're doing here is we're going to delete a column if it exists, which in our case, this first time around, it won't exist. So I've got a column that I'm going to create called testing in a little bit. So if I want to check and see if this table or if this column already exists, and if it does exist, just let me know that it exists, and then we're going to remove it and tell me that you deleted this column. So pretty cool. I'll break this down a little bit for you. I did some if statements to make sure I can run my code a few times in a row for you guys without needing to republish to the service every single time and overwriting my new data model. So this is how I would build it so that way it doesn't break in the future if you're adding columns. Essentially, what I want to do is just make sure it doesn't already exist because Power BI won't let me put a table in there or a column in there by the same name as another existing column, which is smart. I wouldn't want 2 columns with the same name. That gets confusing and would be impossible to report off of. So if I've got that if I've got that column, I want it to delete it for me. Otherwise, I just want it to tell me, hey, that column doesn't exist currently. Just so I know when I see my little console pop up what it's doing, you know. All right. So the next one is going to be deleting a measure if it exists. So you'll notice in this code, I've got this table product variable that we had created earlier. If I go back up here, where the table product is actually from our model, and it's looking up the string product in order to do that. There are keys for tables, but if you are dynamically creating tables, which you can do, those lineage tags won't exist. So you won't have anything to tie back to. Kind of frustrating, but if you have the names for it, this is one of those rare cases where names are going to rule over lineage tags or GUIDs. So just something else to keep in mind. But if I go back down here, you'll notice I've got column properties for it, and I can search for different columns to see if they contain names. I can remove them. And then the same thing goes for measures. It can do a contains name search as well. And then again, remove them. So pretty neat. I'm going to run it just so you guys can see. Got nothing up my sleeve here. So get this guy closed. Yeah. And go through all of my databases again. I should call out the reason I pulled in the compatibility level in here. If your data set or your database is going to be called in here is not of a compatibility level of 1500, like if it's pretty old, it won't work with the XMLA endpoint because the XMLA endpoint I think got released to the public in 2019, 2018. So if you somehow have a data set that has not been pulled down into the Power BI desktop and re-uploaded since 2018, there is a chance this will not work for you. And I'm assuming a lot of other things wouldn't work for you as well. So cool. All right. So if we come back to our script, you'll notice now we've got 2 new lines in here saying our column doesn't exist and our measure doesn't exist. Awesome. All right, let's go ahead and make them exist. All right, so to start out with, I'm going to go ahead and add our column that doesn't already exist. So, which it shouldn't, right? Because we deleted it in this step. So if we have a column named testing, just write column exists. Otherwise, what we're going to do is we are going to, no, we already have a remove. Let's see. And I'm sorry, guys, I have to clean some of this up just because I separated some steps out to make my life easier, but there we go. Otherwise, we're going to make a new data column. So data column is going to be our constructor that will make a new column. It's pretty neat. There are some fields that are absolutely necessary, things like name and data type. Source column, in this case, it needs to match the exact same name of my column and my source. So thankfully for me, I already have a SQL query already built out. So I know I have a column called product. So essentially, I'm going to duplicate the column name product, but I'm going to call it testing. That way we can see that it works in our existing data model. Just because if I look at our data model, you can see I've got a field called product, but nothing called testing. So, all right, then I want it to tell us if our column got created. And then I've got one other little trick up my sleeve here. I want to get the partition for our data model. It's kind of cool just to see what your data source names are. So I'll go ahead and I'll pull that for you and we can take a peek. Righty. And let me just triple check. I'm not getting my end script of script complete. So we'll just cross our fingers a little bit that I don't have to live code this one. I might just not be being patient enough, but does happen on occasion. I will also call out this runs a lot faster in a real.NET application. Oh, sweet. Okay. So if we look at this, oh, perfect. So you'll see our column did not exist. And then our column got created. And then if you look in our new column list, we now have a column called testing. Pretty slick. Our script also did complete this time because, like I thought, we didn't make any changes to the data model. So there was no need for it to do the save changes because there were no changes to save. So I think that's why it didn't quite get to that script complete stage. But sweet. All right. Well, don't take my word for it. Let's go to the service and let's take a peek at what we've got up here now. So again, in this situation, I'm imagining I'm an end user who has this edit capability to my visuals. Essentially, what I would want to be able to do is click this edit button and now see testing, which I do, which is awesome. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm actually going to make another visual. And we're just going to flip that to a table so we can see this. And I'm going to pull testing in right next to product. And we'll just see how it looks. Oh, beautiful. Look at that. 1 for 1. That is exactly what I wanted. So pretty cool, right? You can see that we've added a column, we've deleted a column. Well, I guess we haven't deleted one yet, but you will see it get deleted and re-added when we run the script to add a model. But pretty slick. One of the use cases for this, again, is if you've got SQL Server database that is getting added to or deleted from, or really any data source like that. So in our case, it was SQL Server, where they had end users that were able to add their own fields on the fly in the application, and those on the fly fields would then get added into their SQL Server. And they wanted to be able to pull in essentially a select star from their SQL Server, no matter how many columns got added, deleted, or edited. So we were able to do this as a POC and show them that, hey, your Power BI will still refresh and your end users can get to these new fields. Obviously, we can't add these fields preemptively into a report, but if you have end users who are able to edit things, then this is a great use case for that. So I'm going to go back to my reading view. I'm going to save those changes for now. One limitation that I want to call out now that we've made a change with the XMLA endpoint, you will notice that I am not able to it's going to let me download the file, but then it will say this file cannot be downloaded yet. They are currently working on it at Microsoft. However, I've been given no date. But unfortunately, the moment you edit anything through the XMLA endpoint, you lose this download functionality. So if you're going to manipulate things with XMLA, I highly recommend you save your Power BI, your PBIX file, either in a OneDrive or a file system that you trust, or in a repo somewhere. Just save it somewhere just in case something happens to it and you need to go back to the original file. So just something to keep in mind. All right, and I'm actually going to keep it on this page because I want to show you guys something else once we add our measure. But any questions so far? I just want to do a little check-in. I know I'm kind of shooting out things from the fire hose at the moment.
No questions, just a comment that, this is a good feature, very nice, very useful feature, I guess. So, but no questions.
Awesome. I thought it was pretty useful too, so I'm glad to hear that.
Right.
All right, well then I will go ahead and this I think is going to be so useful, especially for cases where maybe you have 400 reports for 400 different customers and a business case changes and now everybody needs a different measure, or they need to update an existing measure to say something else, to have different decks. Maybe 1 + 1 is no longer valid. They need 1 + 2, it happens, and it can be a pain when you have a small, lean reporting team that has to manage that. This can be something that solves that. So something to keep in mind. As I'm going to walk you guys through it, it's very, very similar to the database or to columns. You'll notice that we still have the measure. We're going to check and see if we have one called test measure. We won't. And if we do, then basically what I want it to do is make sure that the measure expression says hello there. So pretty cool. You'll see in a second that this is actually me updating an existing measure. If you are a Star Wars fan, you might understand why I said hello there instead of hello world, which is pretty fun. However, if our test measure doesn't exist to start out with, I am going to do a hello world. So the only two components you need for a measure are going to be the name and the DAX expression. So in this case, I'm just going to use text, and I just wanted to say hello world for every single line. Pretty neat, but you can also use a DAX function here. So once I've got that measure created, what I need to do is then add it to our model, and then I'm going to have it write a line for me that says the measure is added. So, all right, let's go ahead and see this. And you'll notice that I did not delete our column from earlier. So we should get a message in our list saying that the column was deleted. So let's look for that as well. And this is just me having fun with C# and learning all the cool stuff you can do with it. So if you actually embed this in a .NET application, very rarely will you actually want the console to write a line to you that it accomplished something. Sure. Just having a little senior moment. Let me close it and try again. I wonder if I missed the authentication. There it is. Can't read that. There it goes. Every now and again, I click on the wrong email and it doesn't fail for quite some time. So if you have things taking longer than you think they should, just close it, restart. All right, so let's go ahead and let's walk through some of this because we haven't seen some of it before. You'll notice we've got our tables are the same. We've got our columns, and now we have testing listed in our first list of columns. Pretty neat. You'll notice then that if we go down, we see that our column exists. The column got deleted. The measure does not exist. It recreated our column for us, and it added in the measure. So pretty neat. If I come down now, we still have our column name testing, and we now have a test measure. All right, so I'm going to go into our service. You'll notice that I kept this window open, and that's on purpose. If I hit the edit button, I kind of want to show you guys that there is no new measure in the product table. The reason for that is it caches. Power BI will cache if you keep it open. So if you have end users saying, hey, this never showed up, tell them to refresh their browser, tell them to hit this little refresh button, either one, and you'll see now I have my test measure. So little things like that just kind of throw you for a loop and can cause a long time of error handling. It's as simple as just refreshing the page. So if I pull this into our new chart, I'm just going to pull it in ahead of our testing column. You'll notice we now have one that says hello world. Pretty slick. I will say the testing column, you'll notice we deleted it and re-added it, and it still kept it as a valid column in the visual, which is also pretty nice because that means you can do clean sweeps of additive columns and re-add them all in at once without your visuals breaking. If you've ever deleted a column in a visual, you'll notice it does break the visual. So if you're doing customizable reporting or you're doing standardized reporting across multiple customers, it's really important that you don't delete columns unless you know they're not used in visuals.
Yes.
So I'm going to go ahead and hit
But
again.
it's a log of some kind.
Go back to reading view. So this one's going to be pretty neat. We're not even going to hit the edit button because I've got my test measure right here. But you'll remember in our measure script, I left a little if exists section that will change our DAX from hello world to hello there. So let's go ahead and see if that works. So I'm going to run that again. Having a little senior moment. I will say if you are in the edit view in Power BI service, it doesn't like that and it will hold your code until it realizes you are out of edit mode. So every now and again, I'll just exit this and restart it if it's going too slow. So if you have this in your .NET application, I highly recommend having a timeout and retry functionality, especially if you have end users hitting that edit button at any kind of frequency. Because obviously it's not going to update a model that's currently being examined and utilized. So something to consider. There it goes, much faster. There's probably a more technical answer for that, but turn it off and on again is usually my go-to. Alrighty, so let's go through our code again. You'll notice that measure, so we now have a test measure listed. Pretty slick. If I go down here, you'll see we have a column exists and then got deleted. Measure was existing and then it got deleted. We created the column and we created the measure. And then in our final list, we have test measure and testing again. If I go to the service, I kept the window open again. So we still have hello world listed here, but if I hit this refresh button, oh, come on, buddy. It should change. Oh, you know what? I deleted the measure and then tried to have it look for a measure again. So let me comment out, and I'm remembering now why I pulled the deleted stuff out into its own section. So we're gonna comment this out so that it keeps our measure instead of deleting it. Let us actually edit it. All right. Oh, and you know what? I didn't let it finish running. That probably also didn't help. All right, come on, buddy. Again, this is all run locally, so there are some legs in there. The company didn't give me a gaming computer that I can, so here we are. All right, there we go. So you'll notice that the measure exists, but we never deleted it. So we get our measure exists instead of measure added message. And again, the script completes. I will call out the script completing only happens when we've got new changes to the model. So you'll remember that I deleted and re-added a measure that already existed. I deleted and re-added a column that already existed. Nothing had actually changed in the schema for those last couple of times. So let's go back up here and let's see if this one will work for me. There it is. Hello there. So it's as simple as that. Pretty neat. Again, wide applications for the measure change, especially if you have frequently changing business use cases and you don't want to waste putting something like this measure change into a for loop and having it looping through all of your data sets and various workspaces. So pretty cool. I've got just a few minutes left and then I'll take any and all questions, comments, or concerns. So I'm just going to walk you guys through what is in the other blog posts, just in case you're curious and you want to kind of get a little sneak peek. If you guys are going to pass Data Summit, I will be presenting on the entirety of this code. at that summit. So feel free to tune in or come in person and say hi. Love to meet y'all. So if I go down a little bit further in my code, you'll notice all of this green section that got commented out for the purposes of today's call. Essentially, what I found out is that you can use translations to overwrite a name for an end user without needing to impact your actual data model. So pretty handy if you've got different cases where, let's say, the accounting team likes to call something sales, but the sales teams likes to call it revenue. You could put a translation for whatever your base language is to call it one name in one report and one name in another report, like duplicating your data set. So pretty cool. It was super useful for us because we had, again, a bunch of end users renaming columns, and this was an easier way to do it than to delete columns and re-add them and rename them all. Pretty slick. I won't go into it too much because, again, I want to give a little bit of time for questions and comments and also enough time for Tim to do his presentation before we're all stuck here too late on a Monday. So after translations, there's also a section all about hierarchies. So in hierarchies, you can add levels, you can delete levels, you can reorder levels, and you can create new hierarchies. So I go into all of that in the blog post. I even go into renaming a hierarchy, which is pretty slick. You'll notice here that I did a lot of stuff by lineage check. In the blog post, I go into the reason for that, but also like I said before, if you create new levels or if you create new anything through the XMLA, it doesn't currently assign a lineage tag. So if you do that, there's no real way to link it except by name. So just something to keep in mind. But yeah, ordinals will get you your level. Name is pretty self-explanatory. And again, I like to give myself some little console lines so I know what's happening in my code as it happens. But yeah, pretty cool stuff. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to questions, comments, concerns, and I'll just put this up here for now.
Sure. That's great, Christina. Just to recap, the TOM, the Tabular Object Model, is a .NET wrapper, .NET library. I added a link in the chat window where you guys can go ahead and download it. And there is a question, Christina from Solar. He was asking, what about if you have millions, you have a lot of changes, right? So the way I understood it, let's say you want to do a lot of column renames and all that. How long would that take?
I can't speak to millions. I will say hundreds. We ended up doing it overnight. And it was hundreds per customer, which ended up being thousands. So the thousands took about, like, I think about a half hour. But like any good consultant, I'm going to tell you it depends because it depends on your source system. It depends on how long your average refresh is. Because for each each data model that you're touching, you're going to need to do a full refresh. So if you're touching, let's say 500 different models and they only take 5 minutes to refresh, then you're going to need 2,500 minutes of refresh capacity to refresh it. So if you have a lot of capacity, you can run those parallel and it'll take no time at all. If you don't have a lot of capacity, it's going to take you longer and it's going to be a little bit more sluggish. I will say millions, I would probably do in batches, and I would probably try and find a way to do them on a kind of a tumbler system, right? On like an asynchronous refresh where one thing stops, another thing finish, or another thing starts, that sort of situation. But if each of those takes like a half hour to refresh, or if they take 3 hours to refresh, it's going to be a long time before that wraps up.
Right.
So just something to keep in mind.
Just to clarify that there are two things. You're talking about refreshing. So once you've done the changes, obviously you have to fire a refresh operation to refresh the model. I think he was referring more to the actual metadata changes. And I haven't actually played with Tabular for a long, long time. But if I believe what's happening behind the scenes, every time you make a change, so that's why you have save changes method.
Yep.
Because when you make these changes repeatedly, let's say you have thousands and thousands of changes to the metadata of the model, like adding or removing columns, eventually this stuff gets cached on the client side. So when you do a save changes, this is where you get one gigantic script, because that's what Tabular understands. You have to actually send like an alter statement, just like you do it in SQL Server. There is an alter statement that actually gets these changes, and it says, let's go and alter that database to propagate the changes. So I believe the difference between one change and lots of changes, if I'm not wrong, probably is going to be the same, because the
It's
same
pretty much the
script
same,
is
yeah.
going to travel over to another services to commit. And refresh, obviously, is a different story when you process the model. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you for clarifying. I totally heard that the wrong way. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, if you have a million changes on one data model, it's going to take the same amount of time as like 5 changes. It'll take you longer to script, but it'll take the same amount of time.
Cool stuff. So yeah, you guys can create models and stuff on the fly, if you want to get a little bit more. Imagine you're writing utility. How many columns we want this model to get? Well, they're going to come from like a wizard. So the tabular model basically allow you to do everything that you can pretty much do in Power BI desktop, except the visualization part, right? You can automate the model creation of changes. So that was great. Thank you, Christina. I really appreciate it. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, no problem. And guys, again, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. It's just Christina Hughes. I'd be happy to connect with you guys and answer any follow-up questions you have.
Great. So I have a question for you, follow-up question, Christina. So I noticed you studied anthropology, and then
Yeah.
you moved to data analytics. How did that change work for you?
Oh man. It's a good question. So I'll give you the pitch I gave when I was applying for my analytics job. No, I actually decided I loved anthropology in school, but there was something about academia for its own sake that didn't really appeal to me. So I kind of took that knowledge of how to turn qualitative questions into quantitative answers that anthropology really goes into, and was able to apply that to the real world situations that I found myself in the business world. So from that was able to ask questions like, hey, like I came up in logistics actually. So I was booking trucks for a while, believe it or not, and realized that there was a better way to do it. And so I made myself a Power BI report on it and presented it to my boss, who presented it to her boss, who presented it to his boss. And long story short, ended up running an analytics team after that. So
All right.
yeah, just keep asking questions of your data. It'll get you far.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, Tim, you ready?
Yeah, ready to go. All right, give me a moment here. Get situated. So pleasure to meet everybody. My name is Tim Keeler. Like Teo mentioned, I was formerly 3Cloud. My last day was actually Friday, moving on to another opportunity. But I was with 3Cloud for about a year as a lead data architect in the BI and analytics group. And then prior to that, I was actually working for an oil major for a little over 16 years, and really kind of covering all aspects of data analytics over that time. So leading data analytics teams, co-leading some of our data science communities of practice, and some of our communities of interest, such as our data visualization and storytelling COI, and building out scorecards and dashboards for our strategy and planning team within shared services. So what I'm going to go over today is a little bit of conceptually kind of what Christina was going over. How you can use C# and Tabular Editor to automate different aspects of your model, and just kind of showcase some things that I've built almost like homegrown just to make my life easier on different projects I've been on, and kind of where they fit in. So bear with me a moment. I will share my screen and we will kick it off. Somebody let me know when my screen pops up, please.
It's there.
Okay. All right, thank you. Okay, So let me go over to a blank PBIX report that that I built for this demo. So the first piece I'm going to demo is how you can create measures in bulk, and then also a calculation group, if needed as part of that automation. And where this came up was I worked with a colleague of mine at 3Cloud, Paul Turley, and one of the things that he was doing that I really liked is when we were building out data models, he would have a page in the report that would show every table that existed within the model and then how many rows were in that table. Just a good proxy to kind of gauge, what tables are, had the most rows. And, another thing that I would always do for every model that I create is I always create a count rows measure for every table. And I use those in different measures, right? So if you create just like a count rows measure in your date table, then you may pass that measure into another measure that just says, calculate the count of date rows where, weekend equals true, right? So there'd be some different utility for those count rows measures. What we would often run into is depending on, when you, maybe get involved in a project, there already may be a large amount of tables and you'd have to go in and then create individually a count rows measure manually for each one of those. So the thought was, is there an easier way to do this using the advanced scripting in Tabular Editor to automate this process and not have to go in and manually create all of these measures individually? And that's what I'm going to go over here and then show you a couple other utilities that I use personally. So for those that aren't familiar, Tabular Editor is a third-party external tool that you can use in parallel with Power BI. I just have the website pulled up here. So there's two different versions of it. There's Tabular Editor 2 and 3. 3 is the paid version. I have not personally used Tabular Editor 3. Everything that I've done, for quite a few years now has been done via Tabular Editor 2. But if you go on the website, it'll give you a comparison of things that 3 offers that 2 doesn't. And then they also have where you can get more information on how the scripting works. So if you wanted to learn a little bit more on different examples that they have, this is a good place to start. The documentation is actually where I went to get started and get familiar with some of the syntax. So if I go back to my blank PBIX, what you'll notice here is I have a date table. I have right now a table called measure that just has a refresh date in it. Now, for me personally, I always create a table with the refresh date generally, and then that measured table houses all of the DAX expressions that I create in the model. And then I'll just use folders to categorize them and keep things tidy. And then I've got in here just 15 different tables, all with varying numbers of rows. And this is just all dummy data. So if I go to external tools, and I open up Tabular Editor. And let me go full screen. And I'm going to open up the tables folder. And right now, this is just what we looked at in the Power BI file. And in advanced scripting, there's a couple different ways that you can pull a script in. If you have a C# script written and saved somewhere on your computer, you can open it from this icon here. You can go and then, grab it. Like for example, the one that I'm going to use for this demo, I have in Visual Studio Code. I can copy this, paste it right into the scripting window, and then run it from there. Generally, what I do is if it's something that I'm going to reuse, I will paste it in and then actually save it as a custom action. So if I had the code in here, this icon, the plus icon, would light up and then allow me to save that particular script as a custom action. You can almost think of it in terms of like saving a macro in Excel. so that every time that you would open up Tabular Editor, you can reuse that script as needed. So for example, if I go to custom actions, you'll see I have 3 different ones. Whoops, I have 3 different scripts that I have in here right now. So there's table count measures all, and then table count measures selected. The only difference between these 2 scripts is all is going to create a count rows DAX expression for every table in the model, except there's some exceptions in there, and I'll walk through what those are. And then selected would allow me to kind of pick and choose which ones I actually want to create a measure for. So I can hold down the control key and then just select the tables that I want to run it on, and then run the script, and it'll only create measures for those specific tables. So for right now, I'm going to pick all. Okay, let's get a little bit better view. So this pulls up the script that I already have saved as a custom action. And again, what you can see in here is I can delete this if I wanted to, or I can, resave it as maybe something else. Or if it was the first time I was putting it in there, I would have the option to actually save this as a custom action. So here, I'm just going to run this straight away. And the first prompt that I have in here is, what is the name of the table where the measures will be created? So as it's looping through and it's creating measures, it's just where do you want to actually put them? Now, for me, that's going to be the measure table, but for someone else, it could be different. So I'm going to say measure. Okay. And what's the name of the folder where the measures will be located? This is optional. I always put everything in a folder. So I'm going to go ahead and just create one called demo. And now it's just asking, do I want to create a calculation group with each of these table measures that I'm creating? And this one you don't have to. You can just create the measures and not the calculation group, and it'll run just fine. Or you can actually create a calculation group as part of that. I'm going to run it with a calculation group because this is the part that automates a little bit easier what my colleague Paul Turley was working on, which was just kind of creating that view with all the different row counts for the individual tables. So I'm going to say yes. And then I'm just going to name my calculation group just new calc. Okay. So now this is telling me 17 measures and 1 calculation group was created. So I'm going to hit OK. So here's the new calculation group. And if I open the measure table, here's the new folder with demo. And then here are all of the measures that were created. Now, if I click on one of these and just reduce the size of this window a little bit, there's some things that I generate as the script runs. One is just kind of a generic description, count of records in, and then whatever the table name was that was generated. And then, the display folder where it's located in, and then some formatting. So each of the tables within the model now has a corresponding count rows DAX expression. If we go to the expression editor, you can see it's just, here's the count rows of table 1. Here's table 2. Here's the date table. And if I open up the new calculation group that we created, then you will see that records table 1 is the DAX expression that was generated under the demo folder, right? So so under the calculation group, the calculation item is the DAX expression that was created in the measure folder. And I'll show you what that looks like once we get this published up. Let me go back to the PBIX. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and save those changes. And it's telling me I need to refresh. So I'll go ahead and do that. Okay, so now if I look at my model, all of the count row DAX expressions that we saw in Tabular Editor are now pushed into the model. You can see here's the name of the measure, and then here's the DAX expression itself. and it also creates a total records measure within there too, which basically just it's the records for table 1 plus table 2 plus table 3, and I'll show you where that kind of comes into play here. And then here's the new calculation group, right? So for the new calculation group, if I go ahead and I just have this in a table, this shows me all of the tables um, that are essentially in the model, right? So how many records are in date table, how many records are in table 1, and that's where the total records comes into play. So if I drag and drop this into the visual, then it shows me how many records or how many rows are in each table of the model. And this is the bit where my colleague Paul he had a report page built out that had different um, informational pieces about the model within there, and this was one of them. So he had this table visual, and then we had some conditional formatting where you get the bars in there that showed, well, how many uh, rows are in this particular table, and then what tables are taking up the most amount of space from a number of rows perspective. And then we could just use that for different pieces of information to kind of troubleshoot and tune things. So the way that he had to do that in the past was, in this particular case, we had like I think more than 50 tables. He had to go in and write 50 different DAX measures, right? So new measure and then write it, new measure and then write it. So very tedious, as you can imagine. So we ran that same test, on that model, and then it generated them in less than a second. And then you can reuse that utility for all your models going forward, which is then what I started doing. Is every time I create like a new Power BI project, I always want to create a count rows measure for each one of the tables. So now I can just run it in bulk. And that's just something I do straight away and not have to go in and do it individually. Another colleague that I was working with, he had a similar issue where he's looking for a way to automate generating deltas between measures. So if we use this as an example of what he was trying to do, he had, in his case, over 500 measures in one folder. And then he had another 500 measures in another folder. The only difference between the measures was, and again, if we use this as an example, he had one called records table 1, and then he had another measure that was prefaced with R2. And they were calculated slightly different. And basically what he wanted to do is say, well, all I need to generate is records table 1 minus R2 records table 1 to get the delta between the two. And he didn't want to have to sit there and create 500 measures manually to do that. So I shared with him this script, and we worked together and just kind of tuned it a little bit and stripped out the things that he didn't need, added in the expression that he wanted to actually have in the measure. And we got it to where he created all 500 of those again in about a second, right? So it was a huge time saver, and it only took us about maybe 10 minutes to, to kind of redo the script for his purposes. So if I show you what that looks like, and we'll go through pretty quick here, not to get too much into the weeds, but I'm firing off a couple input boxes straight away just to get some information from the end user. Again, what is the name of the table where the measures are going to be created, and that gets passed as a variable later on in the script. And then here, just doing some checks in the model to see if the table exists or not, right? So if you're trying to add the measures to a table that doesn't exist, it's going to let you know that it doesn't exist and error out on you. If it successfully moves past that point, then it'll ask for the folder name to get created. Again, optional. If you skip this and you just leave that blank, it will not create a folder. It'll just drop the measures into that particular table without one. And then here, I have an empty list that I'm calling measure list. And then this is what gets populated. So as the script iterates, it basically creates the name of the measure and then loads that into the list. And if you choose then to create a corresponding calculation group, then it uses the list elements to basically build out the calculation items in the script. So here, you'll get the message box that's asking, do you want to create a calculation group, with these table measures? And if you say yes, then it will go ahead and down here. Well, actually, let's walk through this just real fast. So there's a few things that are not being created in this particular script the way I wrote it. One is any local date tables hidden behind the scenes. It is not creating a count rows measure for that. Christina actually touched on this a little bit through in her demo, where if you have like auto date and time left on in Power BI, and you have date fields within your model, there's a date hierarchy table that gets generated within Power BI. In this script, if you didn't have that in here, would actually create a count rows measure for that particular local date table. So I'm ignoring the local date tables if they exist. I'm ignoring any calculation groups that may already exist because generally we don't want to create a count rows measure for a calculation group. And then the measure table name. Wherever you're putting the measures, not creating a count rows for that particular table. Which again, from a user perspective, maybe you'd want that, and then you can, change the script accordingly. I just kind of left it as is and skip that one over. So if you do decide to create the calculation group, it will come down here and basically start to iterate over the list, and then generate a calculation item for each one of the DAX expressions that were generated a little bit further up. Just some other things in here. When we name the measure, right, this is just the syntax that I'm using. It's records and then passing in the table name for this particular measure, and then the actual expression itself. So I'm doing a count rows and then passing in the DAX object full name, and then that's the expression that gets written for each one of the iterations that it goes through. And then once it gets done, it basically just tells you, script completed, how many measures were actually generated, and then in this case, one calculation group, because it's hard coded. It's the only one that's actually being created. Let me move back to the top and come back over here. If I go back to Tabular Editor, we can actually, delete these out of here if I wanted to, and then rerun the other script, which was for selected, which I'm not going to run that one and delete it. Again, the only difference was, like, let's say I just wanted table 4, 7, and 9. I could just select those and then run the script, and then it's going to say, okay, this is kind of the key piece here for each of the tables in selected tables. So anything that I've selected here then gets passed in. So in this case, it would not create a count rows measure for all of the tables in the model. It would only create a count rows measure for those 3, and then I would still get the option if I wanted to generate a calculation group along with that. Down here, so I've got DAX Studio open. This was just to just show real quick. Let me go back to Power BI. Like if you had auto date and time on, right here, okay, and I go back. So now you can see this is what I was excluding in the script, basically saying, if the user did not disable auto date and time and they have these local date tables, do not create a count rows measure for those particular tables. So that's why I had that in there explicitly. Another way that I use Tabular Editor with the advanced scripting is I'm going to go to another model that I have here and open up Tabular Editor again, is to analyze the measures that exist in a model to perform cleanup on it. What I mean by that is, sometimes when you're creating a Power BI model, you start writing measures. Maybe some of them are redundant. Maybe you write some, and you move on to another measure that works a little bit better. So you've got, other measures floating around that really aren't used anymore, or maybe they only served like uh, a very specific purpose and now you don't need them. But as measures grow, you kind of lose track of these things. What I've done here is if I go to advanced scripting again, and I do this first one, which is export measure expressions. Let me open this up. So I'm generating a TSV file and actually just placing it out here and time stamping it of the measures from this particular model that I then have like just a little Excel app that I have built where I just do some further analysis on it. So if I run this, it's just going to say, hey, what's the name of the model to include? This is just so I know what it is. And we'll just say ETL demo. And if I go here, so you can see here's the ATL demo TSV file. The Excel app is right here. So what I'll do with this is, let me refresh the parameters first and give that a second to run. Essentially what's happening behind the scenes is there's just like a little Power Query script that runs, is pointed at that directory, and it's just pulling in the file name. So so now here's the new one. So I'm going to click this guy and I'm going to say import data. And it's just going to ask me, do I want to import from this TSV? I'm going to say yes. Okay. So it dropped in the measures and then the expressions for those measures. And the way that I use this is like if I hit find references and I'm like selecting on business days, it says no match found. What that means is it's not finding this particular measure referenced anywhere else in another measure, right? Like let's try holidays. Okay, so calendar days. So if it finds one, it'll highlight green, letting me know that that's the one that I'm trying to find if calendar days is referenced anywhere else in the model. So this is just letting me know that, oh yeah, found it calendar days in holidays, right? And then, here it's calculate the calendar days where the date is holiday equals 1. What I can also then do is just count the occurrences. So this is just letting me know, like, again, if we use calendar days as an example, it's saying that there is one occurrence of calendar days somewhere else in here, right? And I know it's holidays now by just kind of highlighting it. I can also do the same thing like here for service request closed. If I hit find references, it's saying there's 7 other references, and I know this is where it's being used. So it's in this backlog measure. It's also in this past SLA measure. And I can then generate a dependency table. And again, this is saying SR count is being used in complaints, first contact resolution percentage, SR close. So it just kind of canvasses the model, in particular the expressions, and lets me kind of hone in on things, because there might be a reference here where I say, well, wait a minute, it doesn't make sense that the complaints measure would reference SR count, right? So it's a way for me to kind of analyze how are the measures being used throughout the model. And for things where maybe it's 0, I can do a pass on that and see if there's things that could be eliminated that maybe aren't needed, right? Like this slicer filter SR detail, for example, I might say, well, I really don't need this. And it's not being referenced anywhere else in the model, right? It's just kind of self-contained. So I can get rid of this and not have to worry about, there's a dependency somewhere else. And if I delete it, it might break some other measures. Okay. All right. And yeah, so lastly on this bit, for this little analyzer that I do, this is just a combination of some Power Query script and then some Excel VBA, just to generate some of the different columns, like the dependency table, and things like that, which I can show for those that might be interested. But that's about all I had. Is there any questions on any of this? Comments, complaints?
All right, guys, do we have any questions? I don't see any questions in the chat window, but meanwhile, just to give it some time for questions to come in. So this is, you see why Tabular Editor, I kind of keep on emphasizing that it's a very cool tool. It lets you do a lot of things. So typically the way I use it is together with Power BI Desktop. I use Power BI Desktop for things that it's designed to do, and Tabular Editor to kind of augment and do things that it doesn't do. But another scenario where this scripting in my practice is very useful is when you create time calculations. So typically, if you have a table with a lot of measures, you want to do things like month to date, quarter to date, year to date, and all that stuff. And calculation groups help with this to centralize the calculations, but you still want to expand those calculation groups. So you want to have a revenue month to date, revenue quarter to date, so you can add measures side by side and do stuff like that. So what Tim was showing you, you can actually follow the same approach. You can just select a bunch of measures and you can use script to replace the formula. So let's say from total Q to D, you want to change the total year to D in like 50 measures. You don't have to do it manually, right? You just select, write a script, go through the selection and make changes to the measure expression. So it can really save you a lot of time. So Solar is asking, do you have GitHub for us to look into the advanced script you wrote?
I do not, but I think what I'm going to do, Teo, is kind of work with you to figure out the best way to share this with the community.
Yeah,
So I have these scripts obviously on my machine, and I think it's just a matter of getting it out there for everybody to be able to look at and maybe repurpose it for what they need.
That'll be awesome. And this is where, unfortunately, it's one of the shortcomings of our website. Meetup doesn't allow us actually to do upload stuff. It might be best, Tim, I don't know if you have a personal blog or something like this, to post it in there and just send me the link or something like that, and then I'll put it inside the YouTube recording, or maybe just put it on GitHub or
Okay.
OneDrive or something. I just need a link from you, and I'll put it on the YouTube recording so people can.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, I'll touch base with you afterwards, and we'll figure out the best way to get this to the group.
Right. And one cautionary note before I forget. So Tim was showing an example where you can centralize the measures into like a dummy table. And I've seen that on other places. Obviously, there are advantages to find all the measures in one place.
Mm-hmm.
But like a few years ago, we ran into performance issues with this. So which was kind of, we escalated all the way to Microsoft to figure out what's going on there. And they told us, well, so that client back then, they put like 1,000 measures in this like a dummy table.
Mm-hmm.
And I forgot what the exact reason was, but some reason all the queries were kind of firing, taking a lot of time. We did some profiling. We figured out there's some metadata stuff going on in there, if I recall. And Microsoft told us, you have to be careful with this. It's just a lot of measures. So enumerating them in one place actually takes a lot of time. So I'm not sure if they fixed this, but just be careful. And the second shortcoming of this approach, if I remember, was that it also confuses Q&A. I'm not sure if any of you guys are using it, but to allow the user to ask natural questions. If you put those measures in one place, then QA also get confused, what to do with these measures. I'm not sure if that got fixed. Again, this is like 5 years ago, something like that. So just something to be careful in there. Have you run into any issues like this, Tim?
I have not yet, right? The Q&A one is actually, that's one I never considered. I don't know if that was actually something that because we were using Q&A when I was with my previous company extensively, and we had mixed results with Q&A. And it's a good point. I wonder if maybe some of that was because some of the measures were actually housed in a dedicated measure table, as opposed to being with what you would consider almost like their native tables. The other one that you mentioned where there was performance issues with the number of measures, in just one table. I personally haven't run into anything with that yet, although I will say I haven't had many instances where we've kind of hit the scenario you just described where you've got,
Thousands of measures.
1,000+ measures. So certainly something to consider.
Absolutely. Awesome. Guys, any questions for Tim, me, the group, and beyond? Guess not. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Again, the next one
Thank
is
you.
going to be, it looks like it's going to be September 12th because of the holiday, Labor Day on September 5th. So until then, stay healthy, learn a lot, and I'll talk to you next month. Thank you.
All right. Pleasure meeting you guys. Take care.
Bye-bye.